Welcome to this Tutor2U Sociology topic video on social inequality for Cambridge OCR A-Level Sociology. In this video we're going to look at the immigrant host model, the work of Sheila Patterson. When examining ethnic inequality, one of the earliest and most influential sociological definitions came from Sheila Patterson in her work Dark Strangers, A Study of West Indians in London in 1965. Writing during a period of significant post-war immigration to Britain, Patterson developed what became known as the immigrant host model. This model explained race relations in functionalist terms, focusing on the gradual process of adjustment between minority ethnic immigrants and the majority host society. Patterson was writing in the 1960s, a time when Britain had experienced large-scale immigration from the Caribbean, South Asia and Africa. This influx generated intense public debate about immigration, integration and race relations. While many white Britons experienced hostility towards new immigrants, migrant groups themselves faced widespread discrimination in housing, employment and education. Against this social backdrop, Patterson sought to understand how immigrant groups were adapting to life in Britain and what social tensions were emerging. Her research focused particularly on Caribbean communities in London and Leicester, exploring how these groups navigated the challenges of settling into a new society. Patterson's immigrant host model described a three-stage process through which immigrants adapt to their host society. The first stage was accommodation, which involves immigrants finding work and housing but not fully integrating into wider society. At this point, they adapt superficially to host norms and values, but remain socially distinct. The second stage, integration, sees immigrants gradually adopting mainstream values, behaviours and lifestyles, while still retaining aspects of their own cultural identity. The final stage, assimilation, occurs when immigrants are fully absorbed into the host society, losing most of their cultural distinctiveness and becoming part of the dominant culture. According to Patterson, ethnic tensions in 1960s Britain were not primarily the result of deep structural inequalities, but rather of cultural clashes and misunderstandings between immigrants and hosts. She argued that such tensions were temporary and would decline over time as immigrants gradually assimilated into British society. From this perspective, racism was not viewed as a permanent or structural feature of British life, but as a transitional problem that would fade as communities adjusted to one another. Patterson's work fits clearly within the functionalist perspective. Like other functionalists, she viewed society as a relatively stable system, where harmony and integration are essential for social order. Social tension or inequality, in this view, represents a short-term disruption, what she called teething problems, rather than a fundamental flaw in the system. This meant that Patterson's approach downplayed the significance of racism and structural inequality, focusing instead on cultural adaptation and consensus. In terms of methodology, Patterson's model was based on qualitative research, including interviews and community studies of immigrant groups in urban Britain. One of the strengths of her approach was that it provided one of the first systematic sociological frameworks for understanding race relations in post-war Britain. Her research gave valuable insights into the experiences of Caribbean immigrants and the challenges of settlement. However, her approach was also limited by ethnocentric assumptions. It relied heavily on the idea that assimilation was both inevitable and desirable, that minority groups should adapt to the norms and values of the majority, rather than British society changing in response to greater diversity. The central argument of Patterson's model is that race relations represent a transitional process. Immigrants, she claimed, face short-term difficulties adjusting to a new culture, but over time, as they integrate and assimilate, these tensions will decline. Cultural differences in language, norms and traditions create temporary barriers, and racism is understood as a short-lived obstacle rather than a deep-rooted system of inequality. The solution, therefore, lies in assimilation. Once migrants adopt the host culture, social conflict will naturally reduce. Patterson's model has several strengths. It offers one of the earliest systematic attempts to explain immigration and race relations in Britain, and provides a clear, easy-to-understand framework for analysing how communities adapt. It was also influential in shaping both sociological debate and government policy discussions about integration during the 1960s. However, the weaknesses of the model are significant. It's been widely criticised for ethnocentrism, assuming that minority cultures should conform to the dominant white British culture, and for being overly optimistic about the pace and inevitability of assimilation. Patterson's model also fails to acknowledge the persistence of racism and discrimination in British society, which continued long after the first generations of migrants arrived. Marxist and Weberian critics such as John Rex and Robert Miles have argued that her theory wrongly blames immigrants for tensions, rather than recognising the role of systemic inequality, racism, and class-based exclusion. In modern sociology, Patterson's model is often viewed as outdated, but it remains historically important. Structural inequalities, institutional racism, and the growth of multiculturalism have challenged the idea that assimilation is either straightforward or desirable. Nevertheless, the immigrant host model is useful for students because it shows how early sociologists attempted to understand race relations through a functionalist lens. It also provides a useful point of comparison with later perspectives that emphasise structural and institutional dimensions of inequality. For Cambridge OCR sociology students, Patterson's work can be applied in several ways. Her model can be used to illustrate how functionalists explain ethnic inequality and why tensions arise between different groups. It also serves as a useful contrast to Marxist and Weberian explanations, such as those of Rex and Tomlinson or Miles, which highlight structural causes of inequality. Students should also be able to evaluate Patterson's optimism and discuss how her theory fails to address the persistence of racism in modern Britain. Patterson's immigrant host model remains a landmark in the sociology of race and ethnicity. While its functionalist optimism about assimilation has been heavily criticised, it marks an important stage in the development of sociological thought about immigration and race relations. For students, it serves as a reminder that sociological perspectives evolve over time, and what once appeared to offer a convincing explanation may later be reinterpreted in the light of new evidence, theory, and social changes. That concludes this Tutor2U Sociology topic video on social inequality for Cambridge OCR A-Level Sociology, looking at the immigrant host model, the work of Sheila Patterson. Thanks for watching.